Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. To underline the point that Monet was making before the break about the fractured nature of this field, there is a new CNN and University of New Hampshire poll in New Hampshire that has Ron DeSantis, the one-time juggernaut, now in fifth place with 10% of the vote. And I would contrast that if you look back at the Real Clear Politics polling, the aggregator of polls from New Hampshire. Early this year, Ron DeSantis was beating President Trump in some of these polls. And as recently as July, it was Donald Trump 37, Ron DeSantis 23, and everybody else in single digits. So he was making the argument more or less that this was a two-person race with some laggards in the field who would drop out eventually and consolidate. And part of what has changed is the underperformance of Ron DeSantis and his continued slide in these polls. Here is now the lineup in New Hampshire, according to this CNN and University of New Hampshire survey. Donald Trump, 39%, Vivek Ramaswamy, 13%, Nikki Haley, 12%, Chris Christie, 11%, Ron DeSantis, 10%. So now we have 5 people in double digits. And Bill, if you have that kind of a makeup, it gets to be harder to see who is going to drop out, who is going to have the incentive to do that. Why would you drop out if you're neck and neck for second in New Hampshire?
I think the other thing the poll indicates, along with the averages, is that the bottom 5 Republican candidates, I think they have less than 10% of the vote overall. So I think they're going to drift away. But you're right about the top part. They have to go after Trump to make a difference. And I think the next debate might give us more clues. Nikki Haley, I think, surged because she performed well in the debates and she vigorously defended herself on foreign policy, on substance, no ad hominem attacks, on substance, making her case during the debate. And I think this time we're going to see more differences emerge among the candidates. And it'll be interesting to see what the fallout from that will be in the polls.
On the other hand, Monet, to make the skeptical argument, President Trump is only at 39% in this poll, which is a solid number, but a bit more than a third of the party. That is lower than he has showed in some previous surveys. He's showed up at 50, 49, 41. And I would also point down, if you dig into the details of this poll, there is a second choice question. It says, if your preferred candidate were not running, who would you support for the 2024 Republican nomination? And there, the winner, if I'm reading this right, is Ron DeSantis, with 23% of people saying that he would be their second choice. Nikki Haley has 11, Donald Trump has 10, Vivek Ramaswamy has 13. So that does suggest that there is still an opening for somebody. If some of these candidates drop out and some of these voters have to ask the question, not just in a poll, but in real life, in practicality, who is my second choice? Where am I going to migrate? It does suggest there could be some consolidation here that would not work in President Trump's favor.
Well, those polling numbers make a lot of sense to me. First, on Trump's decline over the past couple of months, he still has a commanding lead, but is no longer commanding a majority of support in these states from Republican primary voters the way that he was. I think that has a lot to do with the news cycle. Frankly, it was the beginning of the unrolling out of the indictments that put Trump back in the center of the news and the center of the Republican Party conversation. I think a lot of voters had certainly not forgotten him, but were not thinking as hard about him constantly as they had in previous years. And when those indictments came out, he then again became the focus of the American political conversation. And you started to see his poll numbers rise, not only because of the return of awareness to Trump as a political figure, but also because they felt inclined to defend him and believed that the Biden administration's attacks on him warranted their support. And so that's what made Trump climb. But now that we're a little bit removed from the last indictment, I think that Trump is not quite as much at the center of attention as he was in previous months. And probably a few voters are starting to look around and discover some of these other candidates who they hadn't been paying attention to before and are deciding that they might be willing to take a chance on some of them. In terms of that second preference for a lot of voters, it makes sense that Trump would not perform so highly there. Trump is very much either you love him or you don't. Most people who are favorably disposed towards him are already supporting him, but he would not be the second choice of many voters. And so I do think that if you are able to see consolidation, and that's a big if, because as we've said, the candidates are not showing that they're willing to drop out early. But if some of them do, that definitely is going to benefit some of the other alternative candidates much more than it benefits Trump. And you'll start to see some of those polling numbers creep up to the point where someone could potentially come within striking distance of actually winning a primary against Trump.
Bill, let me throw you the same question that I asked Monet. Part of the difficulty also of this question of consolidation is that you may end up with different candidates in the lead or second in the lead as the Trump alternative in different states. So somebody doesn't want to drop out before Iowa. Somebody else doesn't want to drop out before New Hampshire. And then, of course, we get to South Carolina. We have two South Carolinian field, Governor Nikki Haley and Senator Tim Scott. And I don't know why they wouldn't prefer to stay in at least that long and allow their constituents or former constituents, in the case of Haley, a chance to vote for them in this primary. But I do think that that 39% number in New Hampshire, I mean, am I overreading it, Bill, to think that that is potentially a sign of weakness and maybe a softening of support for President Trump, who has dominated this primary so far in the polling, at least since these indictments came out?
I think a lot of the polling reflects people's anger at Washington, and they know that Trump is not the choice of the beautiful people. So when the media calls them for a poll, and so before, they say Trump, and it's kind of a polite way to give them the finger. I'm not sure that necessarily means all of them are committed to vote for Trump, but a lot of them, I believe, are saying, I don't like any of you guys, and I know you don't like Trump, and so I say Trump, Trump, Trump. We'll see if that translates into a nomination. As you say, there's so many votes spread out. If there's any consolidation, remember, people run out of money, all sorts of things happen in debates and so forth. And so I do think Trump is vulnerable. I think he really flubbed it in his interview on abortion. And that is a real opening for Republicans in Iowa. And that's where the rubber meets the road. Some of these guys have to perform in the primaries to have any hope. But if they do, they attract new backers and get a new bout of publicity. And then maybe you see Donald Trump on the defensive.
Monet, we give you the last word, but any thoughts in view of what happened in the first debate about what these candidates should or need to accomplish in the second debate? Any lessons learned for any of them? And the underlying dynamic is with 6 or 7 or 8 people on the stage, it's always hard enough to try to get a word in edgewise, much less get across the major themes of your presidential campaign.
One of the things that all the candidates are going to be thinking about on the stage is trying to chip away at Trump's commanding lead. Obviously, they do all feel like they need to climb over one another and position themselves to be the breakout alternative to Trump. And so we're going to see plenty of sniping on issues like Ukraine, on issues like the economy. But I do think that they are starting to realize that Trump, even though his lead might be diminishing, is not going to come all the way down on its own to the point where anyone would stand a chance unless they attack him directly. And I think the avenue to do that is going to be the abortion question. Of course, we saw Trump say that these restrictive laws that a lot of GOP governors have passed since the overturning of Roe versus Wade was ill-advised and not what the country wants or needs, and signaling that he would not be in favor of pro-life policies if he were returned to the White House. I think that that's the biggest way that he has put himself out of step with the median Republican primary voter. And if candidates really make the case that they're going to be strong on the issue of life, that is something that could really force even loyal Trump supporters to start to question their support. So I think that's something that listeners should look out for in the debate.
Thank you, Monet and Bill. Thank you all for listening. You can send your own debate advice to pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.